everybody. All right, we've got Patrick McQueen back with Medalist Legal. And Patrick, I understand there were some big changes in Arizona with regard to HOAs. Juicy stuff.
It's juicier than you'd think. I think HOAs are always something fairly juicy for a lot of people. I kind of just laugh. I live in a great HOA. I love my HOA. I only pay $25 a month, so it's not that bad. Mine's not that bad, but some of these can get really political. Some people can get really nasty. And what we're seeing right now, Kelly, is kind of a trend. I think it's a trend where the Arizona legislature, and maybe even some of the courts in Arizona are pushing back on HOAs and saying, hold on a second, you guys don't really have the power you think you do or you previously did. And so we're seeing some new statutes that have come into effect in 2023 and 2024. We've seen some new cases that have been ruled on in this year. And it's really seems to be a signal that says, hey, people need to be able to live and enjoy their properties without such an overbearing HOA. And so there's kind of two of them that I find to be fascinating. And one of them is actually being litigated by our firm in a couple of different fashions already. And this first one has to deal with parking. And so there's kind of this rubric that you have to understand and the way in which this is breaking itself out. But there's a new parking law here in Arizona. Under the existing laws, HOAs had the ability to govern parking on public streets. Okay, so if there's a public street within an HOA, HOAs could govern them. They could say, hey, you can't park during these certain hours. You can't park this utility truck out front, those types of things. Then there was a statute that came out, I think it was in 2016 or thereabouts, that basically said, well, if your HOA is governing public roadways within an HOA, guess what? You no longer have the ability to do that if it's a newer community, if it was a community where the recorded declaration was after January 1, 2015. So we had these kind of weird laws. So if you had an existing community that's been around prior to 2015, HOAs could govern. After 2015, if you had a newer community, HOAs could not govern.
Interesting.
So now we have this new statute that's come out and clarified everything, or attempted to clarify everything. So under the new law for HOAs, where there is a recorded declaration or recorded CC&Rs prior to January 1, 2015, those HOAs may no longer govern parking in public roadways unless there is a vote by a majority of the members to continue to govern parking. And that vote has to happen by June 30th of 2025. So there's a couple of parts to this, right? So remember, the newer communities here in Arizona, those with a recorded declaration after January 1, 2015, they can't govern. Even if they wanted to, they can't do it. But for communities that are a little bit more established, that were set up prior to 2015, I live in a community that was set up prior to 2015, there is now sort of this push to say, we don't want HOAs governing public roadways. You have to have an affirmative vote. There has to be a majority vote, and it has to happen by June 30th of 2025. If it doesn't happen, then you can't govern at all. So it is somewhat of an interesting new rule. It is a pushback on the power of HOAs. It's codified in ARS 33-1813. That's the new statute. I'm sorry, that's not the new statute. It's ARS 33-1809. So ARS 33-1809. And we've already got some cases involving this new statute. So one is on one side of it, where we have an HOA that didn't vote to have the streets governed, and in that situation, the HOA is saying, we're not going to have a vote. You can do whatever you want. You can park there however you want, whatever you want. And so we've got residents who are not happy. And in the other, it's just the opposite. The HOA is saying, we don't care about this new law. we're governing public parking. We're not going to have, or parking on public streets. We're not going to have a vote. We're going to regulate the heck out of this, and we don't want you parking commercial vehicles or multiple vehicles, etc. So it is more divided than I imagined.
Oh my gosh. So if you're an HOA property manager, obviously they have legal counsel, they're getting insight, but I would think that the risk countering what is now statute, I mean, why would you do that? If the law is the law, like, what are you thinking?
I guess they're saying that the law is somehow invalid, or that they could somehow overturn it. Or gosh, I don't know. I mean, it is pretty wild to see such saying we're not going to follow this new law. They have to have a vote, and they have to have that vote between now and June 30th of 2025. And if they don't, they can't govern. And so, yeah, we've got a lot of people who are really not happy on either side. It's crazy. They're saying, hey, we don't want, trailers in front of our houses, where people are doing their RV work in front of their houses. We don't want that. And other people are like, no, we need this extra space because my son lives with us and he has to park there. There's no room in the driveway. And so it's actually gotten much more sort of emotional than I thought it would.
So interesting. I don't know about your HOA, but my HOA does not allow basketball hoops, to be left in the driveway. And I'm just sitting here thinking that, we're going to allow trailers out front now, but you better take down the basketball hoop, right? It's just, is there a statute about that, allowing basketball hoops? I don't know.
There probably needs to be. I have a similar situation in my neighborhood too. This little girl, she just loves playing basketball, and she's out there all the time. And her dad is always wheeling this sort of portable basketball hoop out there. And on occasion, he's left it out there. And guess what? We see the little lady writing them up all the time. It's wild. I'm like, come on, just let her play basketball. It's just so annoying. But
no. It's so interesting.
It's crazy what we
So
see.
on this particular statute, what do you think real estate agents need to know? Whether they're listing agents or buyers agents, how does this apply to them? What would you be letting them know if you were talking to them right now?
I think that number one, HOA or real estate agents, if you're on the buy side, you always need to recommend that your buyer clients are reviewing the CC&Rs, they're reviewing the rules and regulations, they're understanding how the HOA works, they're understanding what color of brown they can paint their house. They need to know these types of things. And on top of that, if you can at least mention, hey, I don't know if you need extra parking or not, but there's this new law out there, and there may be big changes. The HOA may no longer be able to govern parking in public roadways. So if you don't want that to happen in front of your house, you may need to go to a gated community where there's private streets, that sort of thing, if that's something that bothers you, because unless there is an affirmative vote by a majority of the members, and that vote happens by June 30th, guess what? The HOA is going to lose that power in some of these communities. And so, again, it depends on what's important to your buyers. If they've got a big family and they want to be able to park and they don't have the garage space or the driveway space, yeah, this is a conversation that needs to happen. In terms of listing agents, not much. I think this is going to apply probably more for buying agents than for a listing agent. It's going to go in. I think it's going to have a little bit of a play in due diligence in terms of what's important to the buyer.
Good. You mentioned something. This applies to public roads, correct? Okay. And then you said, assuming it's not gated. So are you saying that every gated community therein has a private road and is not public?
It's not necessarily true, but in many situations there are gated communities and they're private. Definitely not true all the time, but that would be the alternative to this, is to look for a community that perhaps is gated that has private roadways. Frankly, there's non-gated communities that have private roadways as well, just not as common. But it's more common to have a private roadway when it's in a gated community.
Yeah. Right. Well, Patrick, what is the next change that we need to know about?
This one is funny to me. And it's sort of, we had to create a statute to make this happen. We had to create a new law to make this work for people. And it relates to condominiums and condominium association documents. And this one does definitely apply to sellers agents and to buyers agents. But basically, for the longest time, condo associations could govern what you did with the interior of your condo. There were condo association documents that said, if you want to change the carpet, fine, but guess what? You can't put in tile, you can't put in wood flooring, those types of things. And this one always struck me as being very, very peculiar because it's like, well, wait a minute, this is my house. As long as I'm not disturbing anybody, or this is my condo, as long as I'm not disturbing any or creating a structural issue or something like that with what I'm doing, why is it a big deal? And so people would come to me and they would say, hey, I put in this wood flooring, or I put in this tile flooring because I have bad allergies to carpeting, whatever. And now the HOA is coming at me and saying I have to reinstall my carpeting, and there'd be this big fight, and eventually there'd be some sort of settlement or an agreement. And it was wild to me. And so now we have this statute that basically says, as long as you put in sound mitigation, as long as you use some sort of sound dampening, guess what? We can't touch what you're doing to the flooring and the interior improvements that you're putting in your condo. So finally, this seems like common sense, but now it's a statute. So even if you have documents, even if your condo documents restrict flooring and what you can do with your flooring, guess what? The statute comes in and trumps that and says, no. This statute overrides anything to the contrary. You can do what you want to the interior of your condo. So that one has always been pretty baffling to me. And candidly, whenever we would deal with something like this, we would usually tell the people that they really didn't have anything to worry about, because it's like, if this ever saw the light of day in a court, I think a judge would say this restriction is crazy. As long as you're not interfering with, rolling stuff on the wood floors and making all sorts of noise, just like you would with carpet. I mean, so yeah, this one I think is a good one.
I got to think though, if you own a unit where somebody's above you, I mean, sound mitigation is on a hardwood floor. It may or may not still keep the sound quiet, So I think there could be some other aftermath here with regard to this one in particular. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, the interesting part of this is there's not really a good definition of what sound mitigation is. And so it's like, okay, well, I put in, these sort of boards where I'm not a construction expert, or a flooring expert, but I did something that counts. How do you know? How do you know what counts? And the other part of this is, do you have to go to the condo association and say, well, this is what I want to put in, this is what I intend to do. Are you okay with this? Or is this, somehow going to be too noisy? So I think there's a lot that still needs to kind of work its way out. I just like the fact that people can do what they want to with the interiors of the property, because I think regulating interiors just goes a little too far.
Yeah. And so case law will kind of dictate, some of this, I'm guessing, right? There will be somebody and then they didn't put in this, and then the tenant below them is upset and all the things.
Totally.
That's why you have a job. Let's just face it. I mean,
Exactly. No, exactly. But I think it is an attempt to sort of say, look, yes, you can, because we would run into people with very bad allergies or medical reasons, and they'll like, you need to be able to stop. You need to be able to breathe better, right? Or whatever. So it was like, just go put it in, and deal with the repercussions later. As long as you were, hey, working with the person below you, I think that's more than reasonable to say, look, I want to make this right for everybody. If I have to get additional sound dampening things, I will. Right. I just want to be able to enjoy this wood flooring or this tile or whatever. Make sure you're doing right by your neighbors.
Yeah. I just think from an awareness standpoint, this is why I love having you on, Patrick, because whether you're a real estate agent or a homeowner or a wannabe homeowner, I think this is the stuff that gets lost in the cracks. And I think this is where, people don't necessarily know their rights. They don't necessarily know where to find it. They're in a situation, they don't kind of know how to navigate it. So I appreciate you just sharing with us things that are changing, at least here in Arizona.
Yeah, no, these things are definitely quirky. I mean, this isn't something that would come up in an everyday conversation, you know. So if they're tuning in, then they'll know, hey, wait a minute, I actually had to deal with that, or my buddy's dealing with that, or I wanted to buy a condo and now I feel more comfortable doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Patrick, anything else on these new HOA laws that you want to comment on?
No, I think what we should do is another session one of these times on all of the additional ones, because like I said, there's about 10, and this can get really, really heated when it comes to some of this HOA stuff.
I'd love to go ahead and just list all of the changes if that's okay with you. And then if people have questions, they can reach out to you and your team for guidance and etc. Is that fair?
Perfect.
I know I'm on your newsletter. If you are on Patrick's newsletter, let's also include a link on how to get on it. But I always find it is interesting. And a lot of what's in your newsletter is what I end up wanting to talk to you about, because I'm like, oh, really? I had no idea. So we'll be sure to include a link there. Patrick, as always, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.